Through the first 5 weeks of the 2022 NFL season, the wide receiver position has been a large factor in moving the needle for our fantasy football lineups this year. In this episode, I'll be breaking down 6 players at the wideout position that I think are buy low or opportunities to have a fair price for these players on the trade market here as we enter into week 6 fantasy football. So one more time, these are players that I have as must buys here for week 6 fantasy football action. Let's dive in. Alrighty, here we go. So if you guys are new around here, make sure to drop down and smash that subscribe button, turn the bell on as well so you're notified whenever we come out with new content. I've been posting multiple fantasy football videos every single day of the week, Monday through Friday, sometimes an occasional Saturday video and Sunday live stream as well throughout the entirety of this season. So diving in first here, our first value buy of the day is Christian Kirk of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, we talked about him last week. I expected him to rebound here and have himself a bounce-back week, but yet again, Jacksonville struggled mightily offensively. Now, there was some writing on the wall in terms of historically the last handful of games against the Texans in Jacksonville have went very poorly for the Jags. Whatever the case might be there, they were just a no-show offensively. Didn't score a single offensive touchdown in the contest and only had 2 field goals to their name here, losing 13-6 against Houston. So it's back-to-back weeks with lackluster performances from Christian Kirk. This game out was his worst game of the season, catching just 1 of 3 targets for 11 yards last week. He had a 22% catch rate, going 2 of 9 for 60 yards, 30 yards per reception. Now, that was encouraging for me to see the efficiency on the per catch basis there. Also seeing the volume still being near a double-digit level margin. Now, this game wasn't, it left a lot to be desired here, but I still believe in Christian Kirk's offensive role for this Jacksonville team. Marvin Jones ended up actually being their top producer and leading receiver in this game, and that's just not something I expect to be the case going forward. He's a savvy veteran wideout, a guy that's capable of making plays, but Kirk is the guy they paid the money to come in here this offseason, make big plays for this offense, and be a versatile chess piece, lining up in the big slot role, shifting him around in pre-snap motions, and doing all kinds of stuff with him. That's what we saw him do the first 4 weeks, the first month of this season. And again, after having 2 down weeks here, I'm not ready to panic and sell my shares of him going forward. So this is an Indianapolis matchup, actually a rare first 6 weeks of the season. You get the second divisional matchup of the year. So these teams will be done playing after week 6 here. But Indy is on the schedule. In week 2, he went 6 of 6, so catching 6 of 6 targets for 78 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. Now, again, I still view Kirk as the wide receiver 1 in this offense. This is an offense that is looking to rebound here. And again, not panicking on the lack of consistency in overall production I've seen from them the last couple of games out here. Michael Pittman diving back into the well here. We actually had both of these as buy low options a week ago. I'm going back with it here. This is the reason I tossed in a extra wide receiver to buy low on this week, for the simple fact that I didn't want to have a super similar list to last week, just to give you guys some fresh information here. But we do have some new stuff, some new data to talk about with Pittman from week 5, of course, occurring on Thursday Night Football. Another battle of the field goals, a 7 field goal contest in overtime that was won 12-9 by the Colts. However, Pittman in that game was kind of reduced to the wide receiver 2 role for this team, catching 5 of his 8 targets for 59 yards. Now, not the best overall production number in any phase for Pittman, no touchdowns either, so left some points to be desired. Wasn't again, it wasn't a ceiling game for him here. It wasn't, the worst bust performance in the world either, but it wasn't someone that you necessarily wanted to have in your lineups for this game. Now, I anticipated some relative struggles for Pittman in this game, potentially due to the coverage of Patrick Surtain. They actually shadowed him around the field a lot for 3/4 of this game. And then it was the emergence of Alec Pierce that actually shifted things back in Pittman's favor late, because Pierce had his breakout game, caught 7 of his 8 targets this week, had almost an 89% catch rate, and was just an all-out elite possession receiver. Again, it's a 1-game sample size. He's a very talented player, though. We liked him for a variety of reasons coming out of the draft this year, and we saw that really flash here and start to develop. Now, what I think the case is moving forward here, there will be teams and fantasy managers panicking on Pittman because of the emergence of an Alec Pierce, but I think this is actually a positive for Pittman here. This offense in a game without Jonathan Taylor really had no other options to move the football, and by taking Pittman out of the game for the majority of this contest, Indianapolis desperately needed someone else to step up, and Pierce did, and by doing so, they literally took Surtain off of Pittman late in the game and slapped him on Alec Pierce. Now, Pierce had the hot hand. He was going. Matty Ice kept throwing him the ball. There was countless contested catch situations where I couldn't believe that Pierce had the sticky fingers to hang on to these footballs, but he did. And I think that this will bode well for these teams moving forward in the future to keep the coverage balanced here. Sounds like Jonathan Taylor is going to be back in week 6, and hopefully that level of dependability, having a healthy run game and a player that can keep the offense balanced. I would love to see Frank Reich actually commit himself to running the football on 1st and 10 plus yard situations a bit more here, but moral of the story, not panicking on Pittman either, just as I'm not doing with Christian Kirk here. I do think that this is still the alpha wide receiver one in this offense. Pierce will be a very nice compliment, but not necessarily someone I'm worried about infringing upon this team because they were undermanned, playing a tough defense on a short turnaround Thursday night game. I just think there's a lot of things going against Pittman on his potential ability to produce in this matchup. Next up here, we're going to spend a quick minute on T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, for me, T. Higgins is someone that if you buy him low this week, you are definitely going to have to be patient with him. If we look at the sample size we have of really productive fantasy wide receivers for the first month of this season, dealing with ankle injuries, which is what really held him back in this Sunday Night Football contest, played 10 snaps, injured his ankle. I didn't see if it was rolling it up or what the case was, but he ends up exiting the contest, keeping his helmet on the sidelines, but never really checking back into that game and contributing to the Bengals offensively down the stretch. Now, his impact was gravely felt not being on the field. It is definitely felt when he's on the field, and this is a guy that I view as a top 12 weekly lineup option almost every single game that he's healthy and available for us to play, and the fact that he wasn't impacted Jamar Chase, it impacted Joe Burrow, the offense as a whole, and you saw late in the contest when they were really trying to move the football and try to get their offense moving, they were having to force throws to Chase. They were having to struggle with long extended drives here. And T. Higgins just brings such an element of big playability, possession wide receiver capability in red zone, just having a large frame and being a magnet in that area of the field. They were struggling to get the wheels going here, and with the increased coverage and respect paid to Jamar Chase this season, it's really starting to kill the vertical game that Cincinnati had the pleasure of experiencing in 2021. So the reason I say you're gonna have to be patient with T. Higgins here, look at guys like Gabriel Davis. Took him 2.5 weeks before what was the Tennessee matchup he was ruled out of against for, was that week 2, and then he comes back, has 2 quiet games, and then you enter into week 5 against Pittsburgh here and has himself a opportunity to, he literally is the hottest wide receiver coming out of this week, catching 3 passes for $171 and 2 touchdowns, a 98 and 62 yarder. So that, not the same player here, but the impact that ankle injury had on his practice time, his ability to separate, run routes crisply, and break on the football at the right time was very felt. Additionally, Amon-Ra St. Brown here injures his ankle against the Minnesota Vikings, misses 1 week, returns here, so that was the Seattle game he missed, comes back against New England. His first game out was atrocious, absolutely abysmal here. If T. Higgins is able to play, I expect a limited role. Ineffectiveness in his route running, and those ankles and hamstrings have been killer to the wide receiver position throughout this season. So you're going to have to be patient with him here. I'm not loving the fact that this is the situation at play in the leagues where I have T. Higgins, but definitely an opportunity to get yourself a low-end wide receiver one for a much discounted price, and you can kind of sell those points to other fantasy managers that are in desperate situations. If they aren't on the 5-0 or 4-1 team in your league that needs to pick up a dub this week, sell the fact that T. Higgins moving off the squad is the best investment for that team and the best route to take for roster management. Chris Godwin here, this is a wide receiver 2 play that I think has a lot of ceiling. He had a nice floor here this past week. He's, continually been over, this is season number 3 with Tom Brady in the Buccaneers offense. He has consistently been the highest volume targeted player for this football team. He's been Tom Brady's favorite target over a consistent extended sample size here, and that's worth something. That's going to give you floor value. That's going to give you the opportunity to be a productive player on a week in and week out basis. Now, the game script was actually, despite having a good matchup, kind of negative for Godwin to start out the week here. The Buccaneers, I want to say they started 21-zip, and then Atlanta came roaring back, and it was 21-16. We all saw the Grady Jarrett sack. That was definitely not roughing the passer. I like Tom Brady. I'm a supporter of his greatness, if you will, and enjoy seeing him pick up these big wins, but man, that was a pretty dang weak call. But at the end of the day, Chris Godwin, the lead that they sustained early, after they got out to that lead, you could tell there's a shift in the offensive approach for Tampa Bay. They were playing much more conservative football. They really struggled to move the ball downfield and convert first downs. They weren't moving the sticks after that point in time. So buying low on Chris Godwin here after having limited opportunities to produce in terms of the percentage and piece of the pie of that football game against Atlanta. Again, it was a good matchup. They just took control of the game early and really never looked back. And because Chris Godwin didn't find the end zone or make a super big splash play before taking that 3-touchdown lead, or it may not have been 3 total touchdowns, but the point being they had firm control and were dictating the Falcons' game script for 3.5 quarters of that game until at the end of things, it looked like Atlanta might get the ball one last time and get the chance to drive. Now, will Mariota have converted or not? Probably not, but would have added some more excitement and anticipation to the end of that game. But Chris Godwin here caught 6 of his 6 targets this week for 61 yards in Week 5. In Week 4, he had 10 targets, caught 7 of them for 59 yards. Again, high floor wide receiver, very good after the catch. May not have the same explosiveness. He's coming off 2 pretty substantial injuries here with the ACL, and then you've got the hamstring that he suffered early in the season. Not necessarily like a significant injury in the fact that you're going to miss a bunch of time, but can impact a receiver in terms of his overall effectiveness on the field. So as he gets healthier, as the season continues to wear on, and he's healthy enough to play football right now, he's getting opportunities in this offense, but as he continues to shake off that dust and get himself more acclimated to playing tackle football, which is a bigger deal than it sounds like here, he will continue to put up really nice numbers, be a high floor PPR asset, and potentially a weekly sit it and forget it lineup lock for the duration of this season. Deebo Samuel, I apologize, I must have used this in a ranking sheet here. We have a number 5 up on the screen for Deebo Samuel. Just talking some good old Deebo here. This is a guy that right now I view as a guy on the cusp of being in the elite wide receiver tier in terms of like a rest of season rankings lineup approach. But this game was just not the great game script that you're hoping for, and things didn't bounce his way. This team ran the football extremely effectively, blew Carolina Panthers out of the water. Bye-bye, Matt Rule. You won't be missed. Hopefully Baker Mayfield is next on the chopping block here to get himself kicked out of Carolina. I just want DJ Moore to have a freaking competent quarterback. I know a lot of people are saying he could be traded, he could be moved off of. I don't think that'll be the case. I don't want to get my hopes up for good old DJ. But besides the point, we're talking some Deebo Samuel here. For Deebo, though, this has been a guy who scored 10 points in Week 5. He had very low levels of catch percentage conversion rate here. His catch rate, I just turned that into a much more difficult phrase there. He only grabbed 2 of his 9 targets, similar to Christian Kirk in Week 4. That's a 22% catch rate, not very good. Did score a touchdown, having 2 receptions for 20 yards. So it was fine at the end of the day. It wasn't a great ceiling game for Deebo, and that's why I think you go out and buy him here. He's got a game coming up against Atlanta. He's got Kansas City on the schedule. They will need him more in these future weeks, need him more as a rushing threat, need him more in terms of, he didn't convert on 7 of his 9 targets, but, they'll continue getting him the ball in those games where they're potentially trailing or playing tight-knit football against, your Kansas Cities of the world and those other tougher matchups on the schedule. So game script didn't bounce his way this week. Again, had a super high floor throughout 5 weeks this year, and they just didn't need to feed him those additional physical touches on the ground. No need and reason to rush Deebo Samuel between the tackles when you got an 18-point lead against Carolina late in the game. I think it was 30-12 at one point, or maybe they had a 12-point lead. Maybe it was 30-18. Whatever the case was, they had firm control of that game, and Deebo just wasn't super needed. So, again, a guy on the cusp of being in my elite wide receivers tier, super dynamic ability, and I continue to love his outlook going forward with Jimmy Garoppolo, the quarterback of this roster. And then Amon-Ra St. Brown, good old ARSB here. This is a similar spot to what we talked about with T. Higgins. He's coming off an ankle injury. We just saw Gabe Davis prevail from his ankle issue and really go crazy in our fantasy lineups. And Amon-Ra St. Brown, I would say, is a week, maybe 2 weeks away from having that type of a performance. Now, the difference between Amon-Ra St. Brown and Gabriel Davis as talents and players, the way they go about their points, could not be further from, apples to oranges here, besides the fact that those are both fruits. I guess these guys are both wide receivers. But it's a situation where you've got a high-volume wide receiver and a slot player who predicates himself not on athletic ability and ability to separate with his speed and, again, his just overall athleticism. Rather, he does it with pristine route running and separation with pristine cuts and very quick movements off the line, his release packages, all that stuff. And for guys like him, you see Keenan Allen dealing with a hamstring right now. Ankles, hamstrings, these are absolute killers for wide receivers, even if they're playing through it when they're suffering these types of injuries. Again, he did play against New England, had 6 targets, caught just 2 of the passes here. 4 of the passes for 18 yards, and Josh Reynolds led the day with 10 targets on the day for the team. He's averaged 11 targets, though, for the first 3 weeks of the season where he was healthy. Actually, week 3 was the game he got nicked up and dinged, and we saw down the stretch of that game catching 1 pass. If you're not 100% trying to run around in a bum ankle, it was literally evident in the tape from the moment that issue was sustained to the moment that game ended. He made 1 crucial catch. I believe it was a 4th down conversion. And then from there on out, he just struggled to get open, couldn't separate, didn't have the same juice in and out of his breaks. It is a real thing here. Playing through injuries is something that is awesome from, in terms of just a toughness and grit standpoint. But for fantasy production, it is not so great. So, like I said, maybe he has another down week here. Actually, never mind. Back up the train here. We've got a week 6 bye for Detroit. Forgot that part. I should have, glanced down at my notes before starting to blab here. This is the best case scenario for Amon-Ra St. Brown. So you've got a guy who just came off a missed game, absolutely sucked after returning from that injury, and now he gets a week of rest and a week to recoup himself here, to gather himself, get more healthy, and returning week 7 against, I believe it was, who was the matchup they've got for week 7? Was it Philly or Dallas? Whatever the case was here, moving into that next matchup, it shouldn't be Philly, it should be Dallas here. Moving into that Week 7 matchup. These guys played the Eagles in Week 1, so not really sure where I just pulled that from, but you get the point here. So you're moving into a matchup with the Dallas Cowboys in Week 7 after a week of rest here, another opportunity to recover that ankle. Then you've got essentially 2 weeks of practice time to prepare for that game. He can take the rest if he needs it, and then he should be back to being that top 12 fringe, elite wide receiver 1 that we saw through the first 3 weeks of the season, post ankle injury. Again, look at the timeline for Gabe Davis here, another younger wide receiver with a lot to bring to the table here in terms of his production value for our teams this season. So there you have it. We just toggled back to Christian Kirk there. If you enjoyed, those were our 5, actually 6 buy low or value buy wide receivers for Week 6 NFL action. Again, if you enjoyed today's episode, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel here, turn the bell on. We're posting 4 total trade episodes today. We've got a buy running back segment and then a sell portion for running backs and receivers as well. Of course, this was the wide receivers portion of those 4. So thank you guys so much for watching. Leave me your trade scenarios and questions down in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.